Hello and welcome to Views from the Market, mid-market private equity and M&A in Canada. My name is Mario Negro, and I'm a partner in the private equity and M&A group at Stikeman Elliott. For today's podcast, I'd like to welcome as our guest my colleague, Danielle Miller Olofsson. Danielle is a lawyer here at Stikeman Elliott, and her practice is a variety of different things, including privacy and cybersecurity. Danielle, I want to thank you for joining us and welcome.
Thank you, Mary. I'm happy to be here.
We always start the podcast by asking a little bit about our guest's past and about, in your case, your work at Stikeman Elliott. So why don't we start there?
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Mario. I was the data protection officer for a large utility company in Quebec. I decided after that to join private practice and come and work at Stikeman Elliott, where I have a tremendous opportunity to represent clients from a variety of different sectors and counsel them through their privacy and cybersecurity needs, and also work a lot with artificial intelligence and that as a growing field. So it's extremely, extremely interesting practice, and that's a real privilege to be here.
There's a lot we could talk about. Your profile is so interesting, but there's one area I particularly want to talk about because I see it in my practice as becoming more and more a critical area of legal diligence when we do M&A transactions is this whole cybersecurity and just the growing role that it's playing when we diligence all kinds of companies, not just tech companies. Maybe you tell us a little bit about what you've seen. You've clearly seen the growth of this kind of cyber security kind of diligence and people wanting kind of maybe the word is cyber-proofing their businesses before they buy them or making sure that they have no material issues with respect to cybersecurity. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing, what you've noticed in the last few years in your practice with the growth of the kind of cybersecurity diligence as part of M&A transactions.
Yeah, thanks, Mario. I think it's being driven by two things. One is the plethora of legislation in the face of data protection. And so it didn't start with the GDPR, the European legislation. That started a long time before. But really, with the European legislation, we saw the imposition of really severe monetary penalties for anything that led to a data breach or a breach of this legislation that's quite demanding. And that spilled over. It spilled over into the United States, it spilled over to Canada, Asia. So all of these jurisdictions are now imposing quite severe governance requirements around the way that companies process, collect, use, and disclose personal information. So I think that's one of the drivers. And then the other driver is just sort of the natural evolution of things. We're becoming more digital. There is more information online. And so these structures where this information is being kept have to be secured in order for this information to be secured. If you think about it, when information was in a filing cabinet, okay, so you could have access to a filing cabinet perhaps, but the amount of data in that one filing cabinet is minimal compared to the amount of information that can be stored in the cloud and compromised quickly through a cyber attack. So I think those are the two main drivers in this area.
I remember years ago when we talked about cybersecurity, Danielle, as part of diligence, used to be one or two questions, as part of a diligence request list. People would kind of just almost skim over the topic, But I definitely have noticed the last few years, just the amount of intensity in this topic. You see this all the time in your practice, and maybe tell us a bit what clients are asking you to look for in your diligence. When you're doing cyber diligence today and you're analyzing a target for a buy, what are you looking for? What are you focused on?
I'm focused on compliance and whether there's a culture of privacy, data protection, and cybersecurity within an organization. I think there are two streams at work that a sophisticated target, at least a target that is highly dependent on technology, will do. And that's they'll have one group, sort of tech experts, come in and diligence really the nuts and bolts of the technology aspect of this deal. But then they also have the lawyers, such as myself, diligence the legal aspect of both privacy and cybersecurity. And so what we're looking for are three things. The first is, as lawyers, we're always looking for documents. Do you have the privacy policies and procedures in place to evidence that you are, in fact, protecting the personal information and other data? Do you have among those documents, we'll be looking for obviously a privacy policy. We're also looking for incident response plans, data classification policies, data retention schedules, very important data retention schedules. So that's like on the first level of what we're looking for. And those can be quite interesting. In fact, they can tell us a lot about the culture of the organization because frequently we arrive and boom, you've got a beautiful suite of documents waiting for you. Only when you dig a little further, you realize that they've only been around for maybe 1 or 2 months. So they haven't really been operationalized. So you have to watch out for that. And so that brings me to my second thing that we're looking for. And that really is the operationalization of these policies and procedures. Is there really a privacy culture in the organization? Is there training? Do the employees receive regular training on cybersecurity, on data protection? And the other thing that I would be looking for, third thing is, have there been any sort of tests? Have we tested how safe and how well our policies work? This is, I think, probably one of the most important areas is, okay, so you have a great incident response plan. Is your organization really working as a team? The worst thing, biggest nightmare for someone like me is to be called in after an incident has occurred and to realize that not everybody that should have been involved in remedying the incident was involved. So maybe a team came in, did everything they could to get the systems back, get the business running, no loss in profits or revenue or any of that. However, in order to do that, evidence was destroyed. They pulled plugs, they disconnected things, and then our data logs are gone. So we cannot know the nature of the perpetrator, what information was compromised, whom we need to notify. So what we want to see is an organization where every member who is part of an incident response team is really working together with the other members and everybody is responding to the incident to the best of their ability. So those are the three things.
So now, with this kind of intense focus on cybersecurity diligence, what happens if you're representing a purchaser and there's weaknesses in the, obviously the analysis that you do? A lot of companies kind of bootstrap this stuff and don't really focus on it yet. They're vulnerable, if that's the right word. What is your general advice when you're representing, a purchaser who sees that there's weaknesses in the cybersecurity diligence?
Well, I think what I like to say is, okay, let's dig a little further and see how material these weaknesses are. I mean, if there haven't been any incidents that we know of, then we have a reasonable grounds to believe that, okay, they were materially compliant, even though maybe on paper they didn't have all the processes down, but they've been behaving in a way that protects data. Then you advise them to go ahead. And sometimes, although I hate to say this, sometimes it's in the interests also of a purchaser long term to be acquiring an entity that's green because they can just absorb it into their own culture rather than trying to sort of shove something, put a bandage on something to get the deal across the finish line. So it really depends, I think, on the purchaser and what the purchaser is looking for. If you do discover that there's some concerns, but you still want to go ahead with the deal, I mean, there'd be obvious remedies. You try and negotiate purchase price, perhaps negotiate an indemnity or a certain grace period where the risk is divided so that the purchaser can purchase the company, has whatever, 180 days to get the company compliant, during which time the seller would be responsible for any incidents resulting from noncompliance. And then after that, the purchaser would take it on as their own responsibility.
One of the things I'm amazed about is with all the concerns about cybersecurity, personal data, protecting personal data, a few companies in the middle market particularly still don't have cyber insurance. There's still this kind of lack of, and a lot of companies don't think it's necessary, or as they like to say, I don't do anything that requires it. But I'm surprised, just given the fact that in some ways every company's becoming a tech company, or every company's becoming a company that collects data. This is an issue for every company. Tell us a little bit about what I guess is the role of insurance and what you see in your practice in terms of the evolution of insurance for cybersecurity and why it's so critical.
I love the word evolution because it really has evolved where insurers, it was introduced into the market, then insurers realized that the companies were less than optimal in their sort of cybersecurity profile. It became expensive. It became hard to acquire. It almost at a certain point reached a level where it was cheaper for organizations to self-insure. But we backed away from that. I think insurers are much more comfortable with this kind of risk. They found a way of diligencing it much more effectively and being able, we're all growing together. So everybody's becoming more sophisticated. I think it's a mistake not to purchase cyber insurance. Mind you, I get accused of always being too insured, but I really think that it's for the amount that it costs, and it costs probably about $2,000 for a mid-market company. the cost of insurance is really minimal compared to the benefit that it brings, because getting that call from the CEO of a company that doesn't have insurance, it's brutal. They're unhappy. It's an incredibly unpleasant process trying to remedy it because, they're cost conscious. God knows how big this breach is. You have to bring in a forensics team. There are a whole bunch of expenses that you hadn't thought about. And if you are in a situation where you're contemplating selling your business and you've got this on your books, it's very stressful.
You know what, you hit on to the area that I think drives a lot of this, is just, of course, we see it in the media all the time, cyber breaches and the kind of growing number of these cyber breaches, which frankly is scary out there. And I think that part of the reason for this increased diligence is the fact that you get the other side of the equation, which is if you don't have good practices, you could be vulnerable to cyber breaches. I know you more and more spending your time dealing with these cyber breaches and seeing them in the market, seeing them out there. Tell us a little about what these breaches are about. What are the elements around the breach? Maybe give us a little of a flavor of how these things impact an organization. And this will probably tell us a lot more about why this is such a drastic issue that people have to be aware of. So,
Well, I think the biggest motivator, and it's unfortunate, is it's become a market and an industry unto itself. So you have sophisticated cyber attackers who are in competition frequently with each other. I mean, it's become the far west. You don't know where that information is going. You could be, you have a cyber attacker. What we're seeing, not more and more, but what we see a lot of is ransom. So your information is encrypted. You, as an organization, your information is encrypted. And you get a note from a cyber attacker saying, hey, we would like X amount of ransom. Otherwise, we will not decrypt your information. Now, this can be sort of low-level information that they have. But, when you're thinking about a hospital, there have been cases in Germany where patients died because their systems were frozen. So it's not just a moral, it's a very practical dilemma. Do we pay a cyber criminal to get our information back? Do we not pay them? It's not a guarantee that you're going to get all of your information back. So your better remedy is to have a good backup system and to have a good fallback plan in the event that you are the victim of an attack. I mean, some organizations have actually been able to get up and running faster and less expensively than if they'd paid a ransom. So I think this is what is the most worrisome in all of this, is that there is a very distinct criminal element involved. Some of these criminal organizations are in alliance and sending money to countries that are on sanction lists. So you're really getting into something that it's really unpleasant to deal with. So that's what we're seeing.
when you look at the front end, we talked a bit about good policies, good practices. How does the front end affect the back end? How is it when you see the front end? And what I mean by the front end, people who kind of are very conscious about, staying up to date on their policies, best practices when it comes to cybersecurity. How does that help to ensure you don't get the attack? Because some people say you get the attack no matter what.
You do. And, it's delusional to think that you're invincible. And in fact, organizations that hold themselves out to being invincible are frequently organizations that do get attacked because there's ego with these cyber attackers and they want to take down the big guy. So great. But I think what the front end shows is the sensitization of an organization to the possibility that there could be an attack, the sensitization of an organization to really looking after information, be it personal information or any other kind of information that is essential to the organization. And just having the reflexes, because part of what mitigates and will make a cyber incident less dramatic is having, as I said before, the right people at the right time responding. If you know what to look for, you know what a compromised system is, and you're able to respond within 15 minutes, there's a lot less data that's going to be leaked than if you don't understand and there are bugs in your system and it's, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 months before you discover them. So I think it's just being attuned to this possibility and what to look for.
And, with the kind of growing sensitivity to cybersecurity issues, particularly in M&A, where does this go from here? Where do you think we're going to go when it comes to both a compliance or a kind of best practices in terms of cybersecurity management at the company level? And then where does it go in terms of, these breaches keep getting more sophisticated and more, as you pointed out, widespread. Do you see any trends on the horizon? I mean, I always ask our guests, tell us about the trends that you see. It's a weird topic to ask for trends, but I'm curious what you kind of see coming or you see more of in this practice as you kind of, spend more time with these issues.
What I see, and I was talking to a colleague about this yesterday, is I think that there's a de-dramatization, if you will, with respect to this kind of thing. So, okay, you've been hit with a ransom attack. That's unpleasant. But the number, as I understand, of payments is really decreasing. So, whereas before there used to be many more people or many more organizations that paid to get the money back, companies are now not paying. A trend that I've seen that I find very interesting, I don't know what the long-term effect is going to be, is companies saying, okay, you're asking me for X million dollars. Instead of paying you, cyber criminal, X million dollars, I'm going to put this money out as a sort of a reward to anybody who helps me locate who these cyber attackers or who can give me tips on this. So what I like to see, there's a fighting back. Now, whether this is going to become the Wild West or not, I don't know. But the fact is people aren't just cowering, being ashamed of this. They're fighting back. They're disclosing it in disclosure schedule. So if an organization's been hit by there's nothing wrong with being a victim. So people disclose it. They show that there's this vulnerability. They show they've taken the appropriate measures to fix the vulnerability. And then it's up to the purchaser to read that and judge for the purchaser whether this has been properly remedied and whether we're comfortable with this, whether we can go forward with the transaction.
You know that insurance companies have generally paid out here. Like the insurance coverage does turn out to be, are we going to, I use the idea of floods and natural events with insurance companies. As soon as an event happens, tighten up the access to the coverage. I mean, is that happening here as more people are making claims? And I know I've been hearing about people getting paid out. Are we going to see tightening up by insurance companies in terms of the claims process?
I think where the insurance companies or where I see them, they're grinding the professionals. So it's the breach coach, the lawyers, the advisors. I haven't seen anybody sort of deny coverage if it's a legitimate claim, and nor should they. But, as insurance companies have become more attuned to the amounts that have to be paid out because of natural disasters, you see a lot of insurance companies getting involved in environmental causes because they realize that, certain behaviors are causing increased damages, increased floods, increased fires, increased whatever. So it would be nice to see that kind of involvement as well in this dark cyber criminal world.
Danielle, I want to thank you for joining us today. I mean, this is a whole area of love that, for me, didn't exist.
It didn't exist when you went to law school.
It didn't exist at all. So it's fascinating. And of course, your practice, and I see it in M&A becoming more and more of an issue. And frankly, in some ways, becoming one of the bigger issues in a lot of M&A transactions. And it was great to get your input and perspective on this issue and where it's going.
Thank you, Mario. This was really fun. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for tuning in to Views from the Market. Stay updated with the latest episodes by subscribing wherever you find your podcasts or visiting stikeman.com/viewsfromthemarket.